Have you ever felt like you're standing on the outside watching everyone else live the dream you have worked your entire life for? Imagine being a prodigy, a brilliant mind with an unparalleled talent for flight, yet your potential is systematically ignored. This is the world of Captain Sarah Chun, a woman whose boots echo with the weight of her exceptional qualifications, advanced certifications, groundbreaking algorithms, and simulator records that remain unbroken. But at McDill Air Force Base, her boots only lead to a desk, while her male counterparts, many with less experience, take to the skies. This is a story about the unseen battles fought every day, not in the air, but in the halls of power, where tradition and prejudice clash with undeniable talent. The morning fog clung to the McDill Air Force Base runway like a damp shroud, heavy and slow to lift. Even in the early hour, Captain Sarah Chun could already feel Florida's humid air pressing against her skin, promising another sweltering day. At 32, she carried a reputation that blended razor-sharp precision with a natural, almost instinctive feel for flight, qualities that had made her a standout among instructors at the Air Force Academy. 6 years had passed since she set the simulator records that no one had yet broken. Her mastery spanned 3 aircraft systems, and her grasp of aerodynamics had once earned nods of respect from the Aerospace Engineering Department at MIT. Yet for the last year and a half, Sarah's career had stalled in a suffocating pattern. Every time a meaningful mission assignment crossed Colonel Bradley Thompson's desk, her name was conspicuously absent. The official explanation never changed: insufficient operational experience. The unspoken reason required no memo. Every officer on base understood without needing to say a word. Her boots struck the concrete in steady, deliberate steps as she approached the flight operations building, flight bag balanced on one shoulder and helmet snug under her left arm. She arrived at 06:15, 15 minutes before the scheduled briefing, as she always did. Through the glass doors, the familiar scene unfolded. Squadron pilots gathered around the mission board, their flight suits crisp, their postures radiating confidence. Major Rick Patterson noticed her first. His tone carried the same practiced condescension that had become part of her daily life. "Well, well, if it isn't our resident desk jockey," he called out, loud enough for everyone to hear. "Here to watch the real pilots plan their missions?" The laughter that followed was sharp, calculated, a sound meant to remind her of her place rather than to share in any camaraderie. Lieutenant Colonel James Morrison, the deputy operations commander, didn't laugh, but he also didn't step in. His silence was its own verdict, a quiet endorsement of the culture that had taken root under Thompson's leadership. Sarah didn't flinch. She had learned to wear composure like armor. Choosing an empty seat at the back, she opened her mission folder and scanned the day's tasks: weather tracking, flight plan verification, and administrative support for those who would actually take to the sky. On paper, the work was important. In reality, any officer with basic flight training could have done it. Captain Tony Martinez leaned back in his chair, voice carrying across the room with an easy confidence. "Hey, Chun, when you're done with the paperwork, maybe you can help us out with the fuel calculations. Not everyone's great at math. We could use someone with your skill set." More laughter followed. None of them knew that Sarah's graduate work had produced a new fuel efficiency algorithm, one that 3 major airlines had quietly adopted. Her modeling had uncovered patterns that saved millions in fuel costs. Her work lived in technical journals these men would never read. The sudden bang of the briefing room door snapped the chatter to silence. Colonel Bradley Thompson entered, every inch the embodiment of his 58 years and decades of service. He wore authority like a flight suit, moving with the weight of someone who had survived 2 combat theaters and formed his worldview long before the technology now filling the hangars was even imagined. "Gentlemen," Thompson began, his voice crisp. His gaze swept the room, lingering briefly on Sarah with clear disapproval. "Today's training will focus on advanced tactical maneuvers and combat readiness. 6 F-16 Fighting Falcons will conduct air-to-air training scenarios. I expect precise execution from every pilot involved." He clicked to the first slide of the day's assignments. Sarah scanned the screen. Her name was nowhere near the operational roster. 4 months of weekly flight requests had vanished into the same void. Instead, her designation appeared under support duties, tasks that would keep her firmly on the ground. "Martinez, you'll lead the first flight of 3, Patterson the second. Morrison will be in the tower for tactical oversight. His voice was pure command, but Sarah could hear the undertones she had come to know. So, a subtle dismissal, almost ritual now. Then Patterson, with a smirk, raised his hand. Sir, what about Chun? Doesn't she have some kind of flight background? The words hung in the air like smoke after a shot fired. Thompson's jaw twitched. Sarah felt every eye turn to her. Captain Chun's qualifications are limited to theoretical study and simulator training, Thompson said flatly. Combat aircraft require real-world experience earned through proper progression. She'll handle mission support duties. He didn't say that her theoretical background included a master's degree in aeronautical engineering from Caltech, advanced combat systems training, and instructor certifications that surpassed half the men in the room. He didn't mention that her simulator scores were so extraordinary that manufacturers had used her data to refine their own training systems. The briefing moved on. Flight patterns, comm protocols, safety procedures. Sarah listened intently, noting every nuance. Her pen danced across her folder, her annotations more thorough than the official notes. She had memorized every F-16 specification, every tactical scenario they would run. She could practically fly each mission in her head, down to the second. When the meeting ended, the pilots filed out, laughter and bravado spilling toward the flight line. Sarah stayed behind and eyes on her day's assignments: weather monitoring, communications, post-flight data analysis. Critical work, but it touched only a fraction of what she was truly capable of. Lieutenant Colonel Morrison approached her as the room emptied. His expression was carefully neutral, but his presence held a different energy than before. Chun, he said, glancing at the papers in her hands, I've been reviewing your personnel file, your academic record. It's impressive. She looked up, unsure if this was a trap or a rare acknowledgement. Thank you, sir. I've always believed understanding the theory makes the practical application stronger. He nodded slowly. Your fuel efficiency research, wasn't that published in the Journal of Aerospace Engineering? I remember reading something about algorithm optimization that caught my attention. The remark caught her off guard. For the first time since her arrival, someone on this base had recognized her beyond the label Thompson had given her. Yes, sir. The research focused on optimizing fuel consumption during extended operations. The models demonstrated measurable cost savings across multiple aircraft types. Morrison's expression stayed calm, but something flickered in his eyes. He was thinking, weighing, filing that knowledge somewhere important. Interesting, he said. Have you had any chance to apply those concepts in the field? Sarah knew the question beneath the question. He wasn't just asking about math. He was asking if she had flown, truly flown, beyond the simulator hours Thompson dismissed. Sarah Chun answered carefully, keeping her tone measured. Explaining her flight history was never simple. Her official service record didn't fully capture it because most of her flight hours came from a combination of civilian aviation programs and military training exercises that didn't make it into the standard paperwork. Some of it's practical experience, sir, she said, steady but casual. I've logged roughly 400 hours in various aircraft, civilian jets, military trainers. Most of that was during off-duty time or advanced programs I pursued on my own. Lieutenant Colonel James Morrison's eyebrows rose ever so slightly. 400 hours. That wasn't just a respectable number. It was exceptional for someone in her position, far exceeding what most pilots had before their first operational assignment. He realized immediately that Sarah's path had required initiative. She hadn't been given the opportunities. She had created them for herself. That kind of quiet dedication impressed him, even if he tried to keep his expression neutral. That's considerably more experience than I expected, Morrison said finally. His voice was even, but there was an undercurrent of recognition there. Have you had any hands-on time with military aircraft specifically? Sarah hesitated for the briefest moment. She knew her answer could either pry open doors or seal them forever. Yes, sir. I've completed advanced F-16 systems training through the ROTC program. Simulator work, of course, but also hands-on experience, aircraft maintenance, systems analysis, pre-flight prep. I know the procedures as well as the operational side. The words settled in the air between them like a bridge half built, daring one of them to cross. Morrison understood the implication immediately. Sarah wasn't just a paper officer with textbook knowledge. She was a capable pilot, qualified and trained, yet systematically excluded from real flight operations. Someone, somewhere, had decided she would remain on the sidelines. I see, Morrison said quietly. And Colonel Thompson, he's aware of this? The question struck the very heart of the problem. Sarah nodded, careful to keep her voice calm. Yes, sir. All of my training records and certifications have gone through proper channels. I've submitted them to his office multiple times. Colonel Thompson has said that I would need additional operational experience before any flight assignment could be considered. Morrison absorbed that in silence, his nod slow, thoughtful. He knew the language well enough to read between the lines. It wasn't oversight, it was policy, deliberate exclusion, wrapped neatly in bureaucratic procedure. Regulations, he thought grimly, could sometimes be wielded as weapons. A low rumble cut through the room, breaking the moment. The sound of jet engines spinning up outside drew their attention to the window. On the tarmac, the F-16s were coming alive. Ground crews moving with mechanical precision, fueling, checking systems, arming each jet for the morning's training flights. Sarah's eyes followed them with an ache she didn't allow to show. These were the skills she had studied, trained for, and perfected in silence while others flew. Keep reading those manuals, Chun, Morrison said finally, his tone almost casual. But Sarah caught the subtle undercurrent. He was telling her something, maybe that he knew more than he could say. She had learned to read the quiet language of the military, where meaning was often buried under routine words. Something in his voice suggested that the stagnant reality she'd endured for the past 18 months might finally be shifting. As Morrison exited the briefing room, Sarah gathered her notes and prepared to return to her station in the operations center. Outside, the roar of engines grew sharper. She paused at the window for a heartbeat, watching the F-16s taxi toward the runway, sunlight glinting off their fuselages. Pilots, helmeted and calm, ran their checks moments away from liftoff. None of them knew that the night before, Sarah had been up late poring over classified intel. Her analytical work had uncovered patterns, enemy aircraft movements that the standard intelligence briefings had overlooked. She had drafted a tactical assessment that could have made the morning's exercises far more effective. But she didn't share it. McDill's operational culture had no place for unsolicited input from someone like her. In this world, advice from the wrong officer was arrogance, not initiative. By mid-morning, the Florida sun was already turning the air heavy, pressing down with that familiar, oppressive heat. Sarah felt the weight of another day spent on the periphery, watching, waiting, knowing her skills and knowledge were gathering dust. Yet Morrison's words lingered, a whisper of possibility. Perhaps after all this waiting, the balance was about to shift. Within 72 hours, events would unfold that would finally test whether her simulator hours and theoretical mastery could survive the fire of real-world flight. Soon she would have the chance to silence every skeptic, or fail in full view of the men who had doubted her. The engines roared again as the F-16s lifted into the morning sky, leaving Sarah in the operations center with her screens, her paperwork, and a growing sense of inevitability. The room around her hummed with controlled chaos, weather feeds scrolling, comms chatter streaming, radar tracking the arcs of the very flights she had once dreamed of joining. Her role was strictly observational, her official task to compile reports, not to offer the tactical insights she carried like an unspent charge in her chest. Across the operations floor, the corner office dominated the view, Colonel Bradley Thompson's domain. Its windows overlooked the flight line like a throne surveying a kingdom. Inside, every inch told a story of legacy and authority. Photographs of Thompson in cockpits across decades of service, model aircraft neatly arranged to mark the climb of his career. He was a man forged by hours in the air and fire in combat, a man who believed every officer should climb the same ladder, step for step. The intercom crackled. Thompson's voice filled the operations center, clipped and cold. Captain Chun, report to my office immediately. No warmth, no courtesy, just the weight of command. Every head in the room turned, subtly, as Sarah saved her work and walked across the floor. Thompson's summons were never casual. She stepped into his office, standing until he finished signing whatever document held his attention. He didn't look up, an intentional slight, a reminder of the hierarchy he enforced. After a long, deliberate pause, he gestured to the chair across from his desk. "Sit down, Chun. We need to discuss your future at this installation." The words landed like a cold knife in her chest. She knew that tone. In Thompson's language, future often meant exile, a transfer to obscurity, an administrative dead end. She had seen it happen to others who challenged the rigid orbit of his command. "Sir," Sarah began carefully, "if this is about my flight assignment requests, I can provide additional documentation, updated records of my qualifications, my training." Thompson cut her off with a harsh, humorless laugh. Captain Sarah Chun sat rigidly in the chair across from Colonel Bradley Thompson, the polished surface of his desk reflecting the thin stack of documents that had just been spread out in front of her. She instantly recognized the paperwork, her own personnel records, training certifications, and performance evaluations, laid out like evidence in a trial. "Aviation," Thompson began, his voice calm but carrying the weight of authority. "Flying fighter jets isn't about simulator scores or academic degrees. It's about making split-second decisions under pressure, enduring the physical strain, and earning respect through proven performance." His tone had the rhythm of a rehearsed speech, each word deliberate. Sarah forced her jaw to relax, keeping her face neutral. 18 months of similar conversations had taught her how to hide the tension coiling inside her. "Your record shows impressive test scores and solid theoretical knowledge," Thompson went on, his voice dropping into the measured cadence of a formal reprimand. "But it also shows a pattern, unrealistic expectations, and a failure to understand what an operational combat squadron really demands." His words stung, not because she hadn't heard them before, but because they dismissed the core of her effort. "Sir," she said evenly, "I've logged over 400 hours of actual flight time, including advanced tactical maneuvers and emergency procedures. My engineering background gives me technical expertise that could improve mission planning and optimize aircraft performance." Thompson's expression hardened, and when he spoke again, the edge in his tone was unmistakable. "And that, Captain Chun, is exactly the problem. You believe your academic credentials can stand in for real-world experience. You think theories about fuel efficiency and simulator hours translate into combat readiness, but believing something doesn't make it true." The words landed like a direct hit, stirring the insecurities she kept buried. He wasn't entirely wrong. She had never flown a real combat mission. Her experience lived in training flights and controlled exercises, not the chaotic unpredictability of war. "Furthermore," Thompson continued, his voice rising slightly, "your repeated requests for operational assignments show a fundamental misunderstanding of the chain of command. I've made my position clear, yet you keep submitting paperwork as if repetition will change the facts." The accusation burned. Sarah had done everything by the book, submitting formal requests, attending required briefings, following every regulation to the letter. Now Thompson was twisting her persistence into insubordination. "Sir, I've complied with every established procedure for requesting assignment consideration," she said, her voice calm but firm. "I've submitted all required documentation and certifications. I'm not questioning your authority. I'm simply requesting the opportunity to demonstrate my capabilities." Thompson leaned back in his chair, his patience visibly thinning. "Chun, let me be clear. In my 28 years of service, I've seen what happens when people are pushed into roles they aren't ready for. Good pilots die because someone made a bad personnel decision." The implication was sharp and personal. He wasn't just questioning her readiness. He was implying she could get someone killed. "The F-16 Fighting Falcon," he said, tapping a finger on her records, "is one of the most sophisticated fighter jets in existence. A pilot has to manage multiple complex systems at once while making life or death decisions in seconds. That ability only comes from years of progressive training and proven performance under extreme pressure." Sarah heard the unspoken message. He didn't believe she had what it took, and no record or certification could change that. "My training records demonstrate proficiency in complex systems integration," she countered. "My research focuses on pilot decision-making under stress. I've completed advanced tactical analysis and emergency response courses." "Training and research," Thompson shot back, "don't prepare you for the reality of combat. When an enemy locks onto your position, when you're pulling 6 Gs in a defensive maneuver, When your instruments fail and you have 30 seconds to live or die, your simulator time won't save you. The vivid scenario he painted was meant to cut deep, to remind her of the gap between theory and reality. But she had studied those exact emergencies, run them hundreds of times in high-pressure simulators, and proven she could stay composed when everything went wrong. "Sir," she said steadily, "combat readiness requires preparation and training, which is exactly why I've been requesting operational experience. The only way to gain that experience is through real assignments. My background gives me a strong foundation for that progression." The sharp snap of Thompson closing her file cut the conversation like a knife. "Chun," he said, leaning forward, "take my advice. Focus on the assignments you have. Build expertise where you can actually contribute. Stop chasing roles that don't align with your background or capabilities." The meeting was over. Sarah rose, but she couldn't leave without pushing back, just once. "Sir, what specific capabilities do you believe I lack? My qualifications meet or exceed the standards set by military aviation protocols." Thompson's face flushed, a flicker of irritation breaking through his calm. "Captain, this discussion is finished. You have your assignments. Execute them to the best of your ability." Sarah turned toward the door. "Chun," Thompson called after her, "one final piece of advice. The military doesn't change to suit personal ambition. It operates on principles tested over the decades. Learn to work within them or find a different career." The threat was clear. Accept the role he allowed her or risk the end of her career. Walking back through the corridor, she could feel the eyes on her. Meetings with Thompson never stayed secret. Some colleagues watched with sympathy, others with quiet satisfaction. But all of them knew the truth. Challenging him almost always ended in defeat. The afternoon crawled by. Sarah completed her routine duties, monitoring communications, compiling reports, tasks that demanded focus but offered no chance to prove herself. Pilots who mocked her that morning would review her work by evening. Major Rick Patterson strode in from his training flight, carrying the easy confidence of someone who had just owned the skies. His debriefing was a performance, full of tactical maneuvers and system reports meant to show both his skill and his jet's power. Sarah listened silently, noting the gaps in his analysis, inefficiencies and missed optimizations that leapt out to her trained engineer's mind. "Chun," Patterson called as he passed her desk, a grin spreading across his face. "Hope you got some good data from our little air show today. Always happy to provide." The laughter in the operations room had a casual, almost careless quality, but Captain Sarah Chun noticed something beneath it. Major Rick Patterson had just cracked a joke about the educational materials prepared for support staff, and the other pilots chuckled along. To them, it was nothing more than a harmless jab, but Sarah had been observing Patterson closely all morning. Behind his confident, almost cocky demeanor, she could see the strain. He had not been at his best during the training exercise. His fuel consumption was higher than the mission parameters called for. His turns and climbs lacked the crisp efficiency of a pilot truly in command of his aircraft. And more than once, his radio transmissions betrayed a subtle uncertainty about his tactical positioning. To anyone else, he appeared relaxed and self-assured. To Sarah, trained to read patterns in data and behavior, his performance told a more complicated story. She had little time to dwell on it. Captain Tony Martinez strode toward her workstation, a mission report in hand, his movements brisk but tinged with an air of self-importance. He placed the report on her desk with a controlled thump. "Interesting morning out there," he said. His tone was flatter than Patterson's had been, but Sarah caught the slight undertone, a subtle condescension, the kind she had learned to recognize instantly. A lot of moving parts to keep track of when you're actually up there flying. Sarah didn't react outwardly. She took the report, scanning each line with careful attention. She compared Martinez's notes with the operational data she had been monitoring from the control center, and within moments, she saw what he either hadn't noticed or had chosen to overlook. There were discrepancies, several of them. His recorded fuel consumption didn't align with his documented flight path. Even his timing estimates conflicted with the communications log she had maintained during the exercise. "Captain Martinez," she said evenly, "I noticed some inconsistencies in your fuel consumption data. Based on the flight path you have documented, Your fuel usage should have been roughly 8% lower than what's reported here. Martinez's expression shifted immediately. The faintly patronizing smirk disappeared, replaced by a sudden, sharp alertness. What do you mean by inconsistencies? Sarah turned to her computer, pulling up the relevant telemetry. Numbers and graphs glowed on the screen as she highlighted the areas that didn't add up. Your reported fuel consumption doesn't match your flight profile. That means one of two things. Either your route was different from what you've documented, or there is a potential mechanical issue affecting your fuel efficiency. The observation was calm, logical, and entirely professional. In fact, it could have been critical for aircraft maintenance and mission safety, but Martinez didn't hear it that way. He heard a challenge, a junior officer, not a pilot, suggesting there might be an error in his flying or his reporting. I've been flying F-16s for 6 years, Martinez said sharply. I know how to read my instruments and log my own missions. Oh, Sarah remained composed. She knew this defensive response well. It wasn't about facts, it was about ego. Her analysis didn't require a pilot's wings. It required data, engineering principles, and an understanding of how fuel efficiency tied to flight dynamics. Sir, she said with the same calm tone, I'm not questioning your ability as a pilot. I'm pointing out that the data indicates a possible mechanical issue. Fuel efficiency problems can signal engine performance irregularities or hydraulic issues. It could be important for maintenance. Around them, the operations center hummed with activity, but Sarah could feel the eyes of other personnel on the exchange. Martinez's jaw tightened. He knew people were listening. To him, being corrected, especially by someone outside the cockpit, was a threat to his authority, a blemish he couldn't leave unchallenged. Captain Chun, he said, voice firm and public, stick to your assigned duties. Let the pilots handle the flight analysis. Your job is to compile the reports, not to second-guess operational personnel. The words were measured, but the meaning was clear. Know your place. Sarah said nothing. The moment was another reminder of the uphill battle she faced at McDill. Her skill set, an unusual combination of analytical precision and deep technical knowledge, could have elevated the squadron's performance. Instead, the prevailing culture turned her contributions into perceived threats. By the time the day wound down, the pilots had moved to debriefing sessions. Sarah, as usual, was not invited. She remained at her desk, finishing the reports, preparing detailed data summaries for officers who had already decided her insights weren't worth considering. The work was competent, thorough, and vital, but it was also a frustrating waste of potential. Sarah couldn't ignore the irony. She was dissecting the performance of pilots she had been studying for years. She could see their inefficiencies in fuel management, pinpoint flaws in their tactical positioning, and identify patterns in their communication that begged for improvement. Yet all of that knowledge stayed locked in her head because Colonel Bradley Thompson had decided that her background and, unspoken but undeniable, her gender, made her unfit to contribute meaningfully. That evening, as Sarah gathered her notes and prepared to leave the operations center, a new notice caught her eye on the squadron bulletin board. It was a memo outlining upcoming training exercises that would require expanded pilot participation. For the first time in months, the wording sparked a pulse of hope. Volunteer opportunities would be available for qualified personnel, pending command approval. Her mind immediately began to race. This was a potential opening, a small crack in the wall that had kept her on the sidelines. But she knew what pursuing it would mean: another confrontation with Thompson. And this time she might push him past the point where their professional relationship could ever recover. Sarah stood there for a long moment, memo in hand, letting the weight of the decision settle over her. Then quietly she made up her mind. She was finished letting other people's assumptions define her capabilities. If Thompson wanted to deny her a chance to fly, he would need more than the usual prejudices and preferences to do it. 3 days later, Sarah arrived at McDill Air Force Base to find that her world had shifted again, this time in a darker direction. Her security clearance had been temporarily suspended. The notice was delivered by Master Sergeant Rebecca Hayes, the squadron's administrative coordinator, who clearly hated being the messenger. Captain Chun, Hayes said gently, your access to Level 3 classified materials has been temporarily restricted. You'll need to report to the security office for processing and to schedule an interview. The official tone couldn't disguise what was happening. Thompson was using bureaucracy as a weapon. The suspension blocked Sarah from accessing flight data, technical manuals, and communication systems, everything she needed for her job, let alone any future flight opportunities. A security review could take months, leaving her effectively stranded and professionally powerless. Sergeant Hayes, then, Sarah said, voice steady but cold. What specific concerns triggered this review? My clearance has been current and uncontested for 8 years. Hayes hesitated, glancing around to make sure no one was listening, then lowered her voice. Ma'am, the documentation cites concerns about reliability and judgment in sensitive situations. I don't have more than that. The phrase hit Sarah like a physical blow. In military language, reliability and judgment meant only one thing. Someone was quietly questioning her fitness for duty. Thompson wasn't just blocking her. He was setting up a paper trail that could follow her to any future assignment. She spent the morning in the security office, answering the kind of meticulous, repetitive questions that turned your own life into an interrogation. Captain Robert Walsh, the security officer conducting the review, seemed puzzled from the start. Captain Chun, he said after scanning her file for the third time, I can't see any security concerns here. Your record is clean. Your background checks are current. There's nothing, absolutely nothing that would normally trigger this level of review. His words were a small relief, but Sarah knew better than to relax. In this game, the process itself was the punishment. Even if she was cleared, the shadow of the investigation would remain in her record, a tool for anyone who wanted to sideline her again. Captain Walsh, she asked carefully, can you tell me who initiated this review? The timing seems unusual considering my last clearance update was only 6 months ago. Walsh scrolled through his administrative screen, frowning. The request came from your commanding officer, Colonel Thompson. He cited concerns about your aggressive pursuit of assignments beyond your current qualifications and recommended additional scrutiny. There it was, Thompson's strategy, written in the cold, impersonal language of bureaucracy. Sarah Chun sat in the small, sterile security office, her uniform crisp but her patience fraying with every tick of the clock. The air smelled faintly of recycled air conditioning, and the soft hum of fluorescent lights was the only sound that accompanied Captain Walsh's methodical typing. She had been summoned here under the guise of a routine security review, but she knew better. This wasn't about security. This was about grounding her, silencing her, while the real action unfolded without her. Up in the skies above the base, 6 F-16s were slicing through the blue, engaged in the very advanced air-to-air tactical exercises Sarah had been requesting for months. The practice was supposed to push both pilots and machines to their limits, simulating real combat conditions. It was the kind of training Sarah craved, complex, high stakes, where skill and split-second judgment determined success. And yet, instead of being in the cockpit, she was trapped in this fluorescent purgatory, answering questions that had nothing to do with her ability to fly. Meanwhile, things in the air were unraveling fast. Major Rick Patterson's flight had hit unexpected trouble. Lieutenant David Foster, one of his wingmen, experienced sudden instrument malfunctions during a routine hygiene maneuver. His jet was still technically airworthy, but its navigation and communication systems were acting unpredictably. Altitude and airspeed readings conflicted. Static hissed through his headset. The errors were intermittent, enough to make his life miserable and the formation's safety precarious. From the control tower, Lieutenant Colonel James Morrison's eyes tracked the unfolding mess, his jaw tightening with every passing second. Foster was a solid pilot, but this scenario was pushing him beyond his comfort zone. These were the kinds of emergencies that didn't forgive mistakes. By procedure, the exercise should have been aborted immediately, but Patterson was reluctant to call it off. Weeks of planning had gone into this training. He wasn't about to throw it away for what he considered manageable problems. Lightning 2, report your status, Morrison's calm voice crackled over the radio. Control, I'm showing intermittent nav errors and static on comms, Foster replied, trying to keep his voice steady. Instruments are giving me conflicting altitude and airspeed readings. Morrison's gut tightened. Foster was flying half-blind, and every passing minute increased the risk. What he didn't realize was that Sarah, grounded in that windowless office, had seen this exact problem before in simulator training. Her engineering background and deep study of F-16 systems had allowed her to develop quick diagnostic procedures for exactly this kind of instrument failure. If she had been in the control tower or even on the radio, she could have guided Foster to stabilize his systems, or at least given him confidence he wasn't alone. But Sarah was nowhere near a radio. She was listening to Captain Walsh ask her questions about her persistence in requesting flight assignments. "Captain Chun," he said carefully, glancing up from his screen, "can you explain your repeated requests for flight assignments, given that you've been informed those assignments weren't considered appropriate for your background?" Sarah took a measured breath. The question wasn't really a question. It was a trap. They wanted her to justify her ambition, to admit that she wanted something she wasn't supposed to want. "My requests," she said, voice firm, "have always been based on my qualifications and training. I hold advanced certifications in F-16 systems. I've completed extensive simulator hours. I have over 400 hours of flight experience. Every request I've made was reasonable and appropriate for my skill set." Walsh typed in her answer, his brow furrowing slightly. He wasn't blind. He could see the absurdity of this line of questioning. Back in the skies, things went from bad to worse. Captain Michael Stevens, another of Patterson's wingmen, reported amber hydraulic warnings. "Control, Lightning 3, showing hydraulic system 2 fluctuating between normal and minimum pressure." Morrison's stomach dropped. Now there were 2 compromised jets flying formation at high speed. A single misjudgment could turn the exercise into a disaster. "All aircraft, this is Control," Morrison barked. "Terminate exercise immediately. Lightning 2 and 3, descend to pattern altitude and prepare for emergency landing." But Patterson's voice cut in, sharp with irritation. "Control, we can finish the exercise. Foster's instruments are still readable and Stevens's hydraulics are within limits. We've invested too much time to abort now." Morrison's hands curled into fists. This wasn't courage. It was ego. He'd seen this before, the dangerous mindset that put mission completion above human life. "Major Patterson, this is a direct order. Terminate the exercise and return to base. 2 pilots have compromised systems. They need immediate attention." There was a long, brittle silence before Patterson finally responded, his voice tight with anger. "Control, Lightning flight returning to base as directed." The Hurricanes began their emergency descent. Morrison couldn't stop thinking about Sarah. Her expertise was exactly what the squadron needed at this moment. Her technical knowledge could have helped diagnose the failures in real time and maybe even prevented them altogether. Instead, she was trapped in a room, defending her career to an administrative machine that didn't care about reality. The landing was tense but successful. Foster and Stevens managed to bring their F-16s down without incident, though the debrief afterward painted a sobering picture. "I was flying blind for 20 minutes, Foster said during the post-flight interview. "Nobody could tell me what was causing the navigation errors." Stevens nodded grimly. "The hydraulic issues might have been preventable if we'd caught the warning signs in pre-flight. We need better technical oversight." Morrison listened, his frustration mounting. This was precisely the gap Sarah could have filled. She wasn't just another pilot. She was a bridge between engineering and operations, the kind of officer who could save lives. But Colonel Thompson didn't see it that way. His response to the incident was a dismissive shrug. "Equipment failures are part of aviation. Pilots need to adapt. That's what separates real aviators from those who rely too much on ground support." It was an old-school mentality, one that ignored the reality of modern fighter jets, complex, interdependent systems that demanded sophisticated technical support. Thompson's stubbornness wasn't just outdated, it was dangerous. By the time Sarah's interview finally ended, Walsh delivered the news with visible discomfort. "Captain Chun, you'll be reassigned to general administrative duties until the security review concludes. Your access to classified materials will remain suspended. I want you to understand, this isn't based on anything you said today. This is administrative procedure beyond my control." The words landed like a final blow. Clerical work, filing papers. While her squadron floundered in the air, she would be shuffling documents in an office. It was a demotion in all but name, a silent exile designed to break her resolve. And above it all, the bitter truth hung heavy in her chest. She could have made a difference today. Captain Sarah Chun walked back toward the squadron operations building with a measured pace, the late afternoon sun casting sharp shadows across the tarmac. She had spent the past few months under Colonel Bradley Thompson's relentless maneuvering, boxed into a role that left her with two grim options: accept a career of quiet marginalization or resign from the Air Force entirely. As she approached the building, voices carried through the open hangar doors. She slowed instinctively, her attention drawn to Foster and Stevens, speaking with the ground crew. They were animated, gesturing toward their jets as they detailed the morning's training mishaps. Navigation kept cutting in and out, Foster was saying. Hydraulics were all over the place, Stevens added with visible frustration. Sarah froze in the shadow of the doorway, listening. Every symptom they described rang like a bell in her mind. Her engineering background, years of study and hands-on technical work, told her exactly what they were facing. Foster's navigation problems screamed GPS antenna interference, a well-documented issue that could be pinpointed and resolved with the right diagnostic sequence. Stevens's erratic hydraulic readings, classic signs of a pressure regulator issue, something predictable and preventable with proper maintenance. In that moment, clarity struck her like a jolt. The squadron was wrestling with the very technical challenges she was trained to handle, the kind of problems she could solve faster and more effectively than anyone else on base. Yet Thompson's calculated campaign to sideline her had ensured she couldn't lift a finger to help. He wanted her silent and invisible, even if that meant pilots were flying with preventable risks. That night, back in her small apartment, Sarah didn't waste a second. Her dining table disappeared under a sea of technical manuals. Air Force regulations and operational guidelines sprawled across the floor in neat, strategic stacks. Her laptop glowed with open documents, military protocols, and case references. But this wasn't another night of quiet self-improvement or studying for future qualifications. For the first time in 18 months, Sarah wasn't preparing to be better. She was preparing to fight back. Thompson's heavy-handed tactics had finally created a weakness in his own strategy. His push to suspend her security clearance was more than harassment. It was a tactical error. In his eagerness to eliminate her influence, he had left a paper trail of discriminatory action. And worse for him, the day's emergency had exposed the squadron's technical vulnerabilities, perfectly aligning with the skills he'd worked so hard to suppress. She started with her old security clearance file, submitted 8 years earlier when she first entered the Air Force. Every detail of her life had been examined and cleared. Pristine financials, vetted personal connections, flawless psychological evaluations. There had never been a single doubt about her reliability or loyalty. Then she pulled up Thompson's request for the security review, filed just 3 days after their heated office confrontation. Sarah read every word slowly, feeling her pulse steady with a quiet, focused anger. The timing alone was damning, but the language was even worse. He claimed concerns about reliability and judgment in sensitive conditions, but offered no evidence, no incidents, no objective proof. Military law required more than suspicion and personal bias for such action. It required concrete risk. Thompson's submission was a flimsy web of subjective opinion. He had overplayed his hand. Next, she opened the day's operational report. The document carefully detailed the morning's failures, instrumentation errors, hydraulic fluctuations, and the disruption to the F-16 training exercise. The report noted technical gaps and urged improvements to support pilots under duress. But it omitted a truth that screamed in Sarah's mind. Those gaps existed because Thompson had stripped her of the very duties she was best suited to perform. Operational effectiveness was suffering because of one man's bias. Hours passed as Sarah cross-referenced every move Thompson had made with Air Force regulations. She found herself reciting numbers under her breath like an incantation. AFI 36-2406, no discrimination in duty assignments. AFI 31-5001, security clearance reviews must rely on objective evidence. AFI 32-110, qualified personnel must be given fair consideration for all assignments. Line by line, regulation by regulation, Thompson's actions painted a picture of willful violation. But knowledge alone wouldn't save her career. In the military, even truth needed to be weaponized with documentation, witnesses, and procedure. Around midnight, she stumbled on the breakthrough. Buried deep in AFI 11-4001, Section 4.3.2, was a rarely invoked clause. In extraordinary circumstances, qualified personnel could request emergency operational certification if squadron demands exceeded available pilot resources. She read the paragraph twice, then a third time, feeling a slow burn of determination rise in her chest. The morning's emergency had revealed exactly that: strained resources, delayed training schedules, and grounded aircraft. Foster and Stevens's ordeal wasn't an isolated event. It was part of a larger pattern. Sarah began compiling hard data: postponed exercises, idle aircraft, maintenance flights delayed because no pilots were available, even though she was fully qualified and willing. Thompson's personal campaign wasn't just unfair, it was now measurably undermining the squadron's readiness. By the time the first streaks of dawn broke through her blinds, Sarah's apartment looked like a war room. Her notes outlined not just a case against Thompson, but a path to reclaim her role and force the Air Force to acknowledge what they were losing. The next morning, she walked into the base library with a new sense of purpose. Rows of thick Air Force legal manuals lined the shelves. She dug into precedents, searching for cases where officers had challenged discriminatory assignments. What she found exceeded her expectations. Inspector General Instruction 93,001. It laid out a formal mechanism for filing complaints about unlawful discrimination and retaliation, with safeguards against further reprisal. For the first time in months, Sarah felt the ground shift under her feet, not with fear, but with possibility. Thompson had wanted her cornered and silent. Instead, he had handed her the blueprint to fight back, and the squadron's own operational failures would serve as her witness. The Inspector General process was never meant to bend to the will of ordinary command authority. By design, it stood apart, immune to the pressure of rank or the personal preferences of senior officers. Colonel Bradley Thompson couldn't simply wave his hand and make an IG investigation disappear. The investigators were obligated to weigh evidence dispassionately, to strip away politics and ego, and focus on facts alone. To Captain Sarah Chun, that independence was both a lifeline and a loaded weapon. An IG complaint could force the kind of external scrutiny that might finally give her a fair evaluation. It could expose the discrimination and abuse she believed Thompson had inflicted on her. But filing it was no small gesture. It was a declaration of open war, a move that would escalate her conflict past any hope of quiet resolution. If the investigation confirmed her allegations, Thompson's career could be over in a single memo. If it didn't, she might as well start packing her bags. Her own Air Force career would be finished. As Sarah weighed her legal options, life in the squadron refused to slow down. The emergency from the day before had left fresh wounds. Lieutenant Foster's F-16 was grounded, requiring an exhaustive series of diagnostic tests to chase down the source of his instrument failures. Meanwhile, Captain Stevens's jet faced a hydraulic system inspection that would keep it parked for at least a week. 2 jets out of service meant the squadron's carefully planned training exercises were now in limbo, either postponed, heavily modified, or scrapped altogether. The rhythm of the squadron, its operational tempo, was stuttering, thrown off balance by technical problems that should have been preventable with better maintenance protocols. Lieutenant Colonel James Morrison, the squadron's second-in-command, found himself juggling crises like spinning plates. Each incident left him with fewer resources and more headaches. What the unit desperately needed was someone who could see the hidden patterns in the case, an expert in technical systems who could identify why these aircraft were failing and develop preventive strategies. But Thompson's rigid personnel policies had driven away or sidelined the very kind of analytical talent the squadron needed most. Morrison could feel his own frustration building, but as deputy commander, he was caught in a vice. He could advise and suggest, but ultimate authority belonged to Thompson. And Thompson was not a man who reconsidered his decisions lightly. To make matters worse, Group Headquarters was breathing down their necks, demanding explanations for every delayed exercise and every shortfall in mission readiness. The pressure from above was constant, amplifying the tension inside the unit. Morrison was beginning to see the larger pattern. These weren't random technical hiccups. They were the symptoms of a deeper systemic failure. And Sarah, with her engineering background and pattern recognition skills, was uniquely equipped to address it. That afternoon, Sarah made a decision that would alter the course of her battle with Thompson. She would file the IG complaint, formally accusing him of discrimination and abuse of authority. But first, she resolved to make one final attempt to solve the problem within normal channels. It wasn't just caution, it was strategy. If she could find a reasonable internal solution, she might avoid the fallout that would come with a formal investigation. She requested a private meeting with Morrison, careful not to mention her looming legal move. If anyone could help her broker a path forward, it was him. He had already shown signs of understanding the squadron's technical weaknesses and might be able to influence assignment decisions, even if only indirectly. The meeting took place in Morrison's office, well away from the operations center where walls had ears. Sarah arrived prepared. She had built a comprehensive presentation that documented the squadron's operational struggles and clearly showed how her skills could fill the gap. "Sir," she began, voice steady but edged with urgency, "I've been reviewing the technical failures that have been hitting our training exercises. The issues follow patterns. These failures aren't random. They can be predicted and prevented with better diagnostic procedures and maintenance protocols." Morrison leaned forward, genuine interest flickering across his face. "What kind of patterns are we talking about?" Sarah opened her laptop, revealing charts and graphs she had been compiling for weeks. 6 months of data unfolded on the screen, spikes, trends, and warning signs hidden in the noise. Navigation system failures like Lieutenant Foster's usually come from GPS antenna interference, she explained, pointing to a sharp cluster on the graph. "It's a direct result of improper maintenance procedures. And Captain Stevens's hydraulic problem? That's almost always the first warning of pressure regulator wear. A simple routine test could have caught it before it grounded the jet." Morrison's eyes narrowed as he studied the data. The presentation was nothing short of impressive. Her analysis went far beyond the squadron's current capabilities. In a single glance, he could see the operational benefit. Fewer grounded jets, safer pilots, and a squadron that wasn't constantly playing catch-up with its own machines. "This," he said slowly, "this is exactly the kind of insight we've been missing. Our maintenance program is reactive. We're always waiting for something to break instead of stopping it before it happens." For the first time in months, Sarah felt a flicker of hope. Morrison wasn't looking at her as a problem or a burden. He was seeing her as an asset, someone who could make the squadron stronger. "Sir, my engineering background includes specialized training in failure analysis and preventive maintenance. I can design protocols that will dramatically reduce equipment failures and keep our aircraft in the air." Morrison nodded, weighing the operational benefits against the political cost of defying Thompson. "Captain Chun, your analysis is solid. We need this kind of support. But you know Colonel Thompson's position on flight-related assignments." The dilemma was laid bare. Morrison could see the value she offered, but Thompson's shadow loomed large. He wasn't willing to challenge his commander head-on. Sarah leaned in. "This wouldn't have to involve flight assignments. I can handle the analysis and protocol development in an engineering support role. It wouldn't interfere with Colonel Thompson's policies on operational duties." It was a carefully crafted compromise. The squadron would get the technical expertise it desperately needed, and Thompson wouldn't have to formally acknowledge her as a pilot in active flight rotation. Morrison thought it over, the gears turning behind his calm expression. "Let me talk to Colonel Thompson. Your work speaks for itself, and we may be able to slot you into a technical role without stepping on any landmines." The meeting ended with cautious optimism, but Sarah knew the limits of Morrison's influence. If Thompson refused, she would have no choice but to move forward with her IG complaint. That night, she finalized her documentation. Every email, every report, every witness statement, neatly organized into a package that painted a damning picture of Thompson's behavior. It showed a clear pattern, discrimination rooted in personal bias that had rippled outward to affect the squadron's operations. Still, she held the complaint back for 48 hours, giving Morrison a chance to present her compromise. If Thompson showed any willingness to use her expertise, she could achieve her goal without detonating the political bomb of an IG investigation. 2 days, that was the window. 2 days to see if reason could prevail over prejudice. Sarah braced herself for either outcome. She knew the moment she pressed submit, careers could end, and the squadron's culture could shift forever. She hoped, almost desperately, that operational necessity would outweigh old-school bias. On the morning of the third day, McDill Air Force Base woke to chaos. At 05:45 hours, as Sarah reviewed her complaint one final time, the squadron alarm shattered the quiet. A piercing wail tore through the base, announcing a new emergency, one that would change everything. Captain Sarah Chun sat buried in administrative paperwork, her desk tucked away in a quiet corner of McDill Air Force Base. For 18 months, her world had been reduced to reports, memos, and maintenance logs, her skills grounded by a pending security review. Through the window, she could see the flurry of activity on the tarmac, ground crews preparing equipment, the occasional roar of a jet engine, but she was only a distant spectator. Then the emergency sirens pierced the air. A harsh, static-filled voice cracked over the base communication system, tight with strain and edged with panic. Mayday, Mayday, Control, Lightning 7 experiencing complete electrical failure at 15,000 feet. All navigation and communication systems are down. I'm flying blind in zero visibility. Captain David Foster's words hit the operations center like a shockwave. Controllers leapt into action, scanning their radar screens and shouting updates across the room. His F-16 was somewhere above the Gulf of Mexico, swallowed by dense cloud cover, practically invisible to ground radar. The multi-million-dollar fighter had been reduced to the flying equivalent of a 19th century aircraft. No instruments, no navigation, and no clear way home. Colonel Bradley Thompson stormed into the room, his expression carved in stone. He absorbed the rapid-fire status reports as they flew from one console to another. "How many qualified pilots do we have available for immediate search and rescue?" he demanded. Master Sergeant Hayes scanned the duty roster, her face tightening with each name she read. "Sir, Major Patterson is grounded on medical restriction. Captain Martinez is on emergency leave. Captain Stevens' aircraft is still down for hydraulic repairs." She hesitated. "We have 2 available pilots, but they're both junior officers with very limited emergency ops experience." Thompson's jaw locked. A perfect storm. One of his most skilled pilots was in mortal danger, and the squadron had been hollowed out by leave, repairs, and red tape. Foster didn't just need a search party. He needed an expert aviator and a technician who could guide him through emergency procedures in midair. The 2 junior pilots on hand weren't ready for this. Lieutenant Colonel James Morrison stepped forward, his voice urgent and unflinching. "Sir, we need every resource we have. Foster's electrical failure means standard navigation is off the table. Someone has to talk him through manual flight techniques while we try to establish visual contact." Everyone in the room knew what he wasn't saying out loud. The squadron didn't have the expertise in the air right now to save Foster. The technical knowledge they needed was sitting behind a desk in the administrative wing. Sarah had been listening to the commotion from her office, her heart quickening as the details came through. An F-16 with total electrical failure, generator outage, or main power bus failure. Both followed predictable patterns. Both were survivable if diagnosed quickly and handled by someone who understood the systems inside and out, and that someone, she knew without a shred of doubt, was her. Through the glass, she watched the emergency teams spring into motion, the base coming alive like a kicked anthill. Controllers were shouting coordinates, ground crews were moving rescue vehicles into place, and somewhere up in the clouds, David Foster was fighting for his life in a powerless jet. When Morrison appeared in her doorway, grim and purposeful, she already knew why he was there. "Captain Chun," he said, his tone leaving no room for argument, "we need your expertise now. We have a pilot in distress, and your knowledge of F-16 electrical systems might be the only thing that saves him." Sarah pushed back from her desk, adrenaline washing over the months of frustration and exile. This was the moment she'd been waiting for, though she'd never imagined it would come with a man's life hanging by a thread. "Sir, what's Captain Foster's status?" Morrison briefed her as they walked briskly toward the operations center. "Complete electrical loss, zero visibility, intermittent communication." Foster was hand-flying a crippled jet through thick cloud, with fuel running down and nowhere to land safely. The room fell silent the moment Sarah entered. Colonel Thompson's face darkened instantly at the sight of her. "Colonel," Morrison said without hesitation, "Captain Chun has the technical expertise we need to guide Foster. Her engineering background makes her uniquely qualified." She's not cleared for emergency operations, Thompson snapped. Her security review is still pending. She has no operational authorization. It was clear, even now, that Thompson cared more about protocol than survival. His voice carried the weight of bureaucracy, not urgency. Sir, Morrison pressed, his patience thinning, Foster needs help we can't provide. Chun's qualifications are exactly what this situation demands. Sarah stepped forward, her voice calm and steady despite the tension crackling in the air. Colonel Thompson, I volunteered to provide technical assistance. Emergency operations override administrative restrictions, and my expertise could prevent a fatality. It was the truth, and the regulation backed her. To refuse her now could be considered negligence if the worst happened. Before Thompson could answer, the radio hissed again, Foster's voice breaking through in raw desperation. McDill Control, Lightning 7. I'm losing altitude. Can't maintain level flight. Fuel is getting critical. I still can't find the runway. That was all Morrison needed to hear. Chun, you're our best shot. Talk him through it. Sarah slid into the communication chair, her hands steady as she tuned the radio. Her months of study, her years of training, all funneled into this single razor's edge of a moment. Lightning 7, this is McDill Operations. Captain Chun speaking. I'm here to help you troubleshoot your electrical system. Tell me exactly what happened when you lost power. Relief bled through Foster's staticky reply. Operations. I was in a climbing turn when everything went black. All instrument panels died at once. Emergency lighting's on, but nav and comm are cutting in and out. Sarah pictured the cockpit in her mind and felt the pieces click. Lightning 7, that pattern suggests a main generator failure with partial backup. I'm going to walk you through emergency power restoration. First, locate the emergency electrical panel on your left console. The next 20 minutes stretched into eternity. Sarah's voice was the lifeline tethering Foster to hope as she guided him through step-by-step diagnostic procedures, every instruction clear, calm, and precise. Outside, the weather churned. Inside the cockpit, Foster fought fatigue, fear, and gravity itself. Then finally his voice came through the radio, stronger and steadier. McDill Operations, Lightning 7, I have partial power. Navigation's coming online. I can see runway approach lights through the clouds. Cheers rippled through the operations center, but Sarah didn't let herself relax until the radar confirmed the F-16 on final approach. Moments later, the jet pierced the cloud deck and touched down on runway 09, fire and rescue vehicles chasing its shadow. Captain David Foster rolled to a stop, alive, his aircraft scarred but intact. In less than an hour, Sarah Chun had gone from forgotten desk officer to the voice that pulled a fellow pilot back from the edge of disaster. Emergency lights flared across the tarmac as crews swarmed the aircraft, surrounding it before its wheels had even cooled on the runway. The plane rolled to a shaky stop, and before anyone could reach him, Foster was already climbing out of the cockpit. Even from the control tower, his visible relief was unmistakable. The immediate danger was over. But in the operations center, the weight of what had just happened was only beginning to settle in. Captain Sarah Chun had done what no one else on the base could have pulled off. Her technical precision under extreme pressure had been flawless, and there was no way to dismiss it or explain it away with bureaucratic excuses. She hadn't just saved a jet, she'd saved a life, and every soul in the squadron now knew it. Colonel Bradley Thompson stood in stunned silence, watching Foster stride across the tarmac toward the operations building. 18 months of his deliberate effort to sideline Sarah, to keep her locked into meaningless duties, had been obliterated in 20 minutes of undeniable skill. Major Rick Patterson approached her first. He had been monitoring the emergency under medical restriction and now wore an expression Sarah had never seen before. Gone was the smirk, the patronizing tone. In its place was something like genuine respect. Chun, that was incredible, he said, his voice quieter than usual. Foster's alive because you knew exactly how to handle that electrical failure. I've never seen anyone talk a pilot through those procedures with that kind of precision. The words landed heavier than any metal could have. Patterson, one of her most frequent detractors, was admitting that her technical knowledge had practical value beyond his own. For the first time, someone in the squadron wasn't just tolerating her expertise, They were acknowledging it. Captain Tony Martinez joined in, his tone subdued but sincere. I owe you an apology, Captain Chun. I've been acting like you didn't belong here. What you just did proves we need your expertise more than any of us realized. Around the operations center, the realization was spreading. Sarah hadn't just given instructions. She had led under crushing pressure, the kind that stripped away ego and pretense. Lieutenant Colonel James Morrison approached with clear satisfaction. Chun, that was outstanding. Your technical knowledge and your ability to communicate under pressure saved Foster's life. I want you to know, I'll be documenting this in my official report. The promise of recognition mattered, but Sarah felt the shift more in the room than on paper. The usual hostile stares, the dismissive mutters, gone. In their place was a quiet, almost reluctant respect. An hour later, Foster himself walked into the operations center, still in his flight suit, helmet tucked under his arm. He headed straight for Sarah, extended his hand, and said without hesitation, Captain Chun, thank you. You saved my life today. Your guidance through that electrical failure was perfect. I wouldn't have made it back without you. Coming from Foster, the squadron's golden pilot, the words carried a weight that no regulation could fabricate. He wasn't following protocol. He was simply acknowledging the truth. Under life and death pressure, Sarah Chun had been the most competent person in the room. Then Colonel Thompson spoke, and the room chilled. Foster, I'm glad you're safe, he said carefully. But let's not overstate the situation. Captain Chun provided basic technical support, something any qualified engineer could have done. Every face turned toward him in disbelief. His attempt to minimize Sarah's contribution was not just insulting, it was absurd. Everyone had heard her guidance, sophisticated, precise, and delivered with unshakable composure. Thompson's denial revealed what everyone already suspected. He would rather warp reality than acknowledge her value. Morrison's response was immediate and firm. With respect, Colonel, Captain Chun's performance was exceptional by any standard. Her technical knowledge and communication skills under pressure exceeded anything I've seen from our current personnel. That moment, the open, public challenge, signaled a fundamental shift in the squadron. Morrison's stance gave others the courage to speak. Master Sergeant Hayes, who had monitored every word of the crisis over comms, added her voice. Sir, Captain Chun's radio procedures were textbook perfect. She stayed calm the entire time, gave technically accurate instructions, and communicated them clearly. The support grew, and with it, a consensus Thompson could no longer smother. 3 weeks after Foster's emergency landing, McDill Air Force Base looked and felt different. Sarah's desk had been moved from a back corner administrative nook to the heart of the Technical Operations Center, where her engineering expertise was finally being put to real use. She wasn't just taking notes anymore. She was developing maintenance protocols and diagnostic procedures that the entire squadron relied on. The official recognition came in the form of a commendation for exceptional performance during emergency operations. But the practical impact of her work mattered more than the paper. Within 3 weeks, the maintenance protocol she created had reduced equipment failures by 60%. Her diagnostic routines flagged issues before they escalated, preventing potential emergencies and saving both aircraft and pilots. Morale shifted alongside the metrics. Aircraft availability improved. Mission planning became more reliable. Pilots' confidence surged because they finally trusted the machines they flew. Sarah's technical support didn't just prevent disasters, it made the squadron sharper, faster, and safer. Foster became her loudest advocate. Chun didn't just save my life, he told anyone who would listen. She showed all of us what real technical expertise looks like. We should have been listening to her from the start. Even Martinez, who had once written her off, changed completely. He sought her input in briefings, deferred to her expertise, and admitted publicly, I was wrong about Captain Chun. Her engineering background gives her insights that make all of us better. Major Patterson's transformation went even further. He asked Sarah to review his flight techniques and help improve his efficiency. He told the squadron, Chun understands these systems better than anyone here. Her advice has made me a better pilot. For a man who had once been her sharpest critic, the statement was proof that the culture had shifted. Technical competence, not rank, not tradition, was now the language of respect. Meanwhile, Colonel Thompson was reassigned to a staff position at Group Headquarters, his authority quietly stripped away. Morrison took over as acting squadron commander, and his first recommendation was clear. Captain Chun has demonstrated technical expertise and leadership far beyond her current role. She should be considered for immediate flight status and operational assignments. The squadron that once doubted her had no choice now but to acknowledge the truth. Sarah Chun wasn't just an engineer. She was the difference between survival and disaster. The formal recommendation came with a clear message. Sarah Chun shouldn't just be maintaining aircraft. She should be flying them. That single statement triggered a formal review process to determine if she was qualified for pilot certification and operational assignments. The officers conducting the review were the same ones who had watched her handle the emergency with Foster, ensuring the evaluation would be fair and based on her actual performance rather than assumptions or bias. 4 weeks after that incident, Sarah found herself strapping into the cockpit of an F-16 Fighting Falcon for her very first official test flight. For years, she had studied every system, every schematic, every technical nuance of this aircraft. Now, the machine she had known only in theory was under her direct control, and it was ready to respond to her hands alone. During the pre-flight inspection, Sarah's depth of technical knowledge became immediately clear. She spotted potential problems the ground crew had overlooked, tiny details that could matter in a critical moment. Her engineering background translated directly into better preparation and flawless safety procedures, and every instructor observing her noticed it. Takeoff was smooth, measured, and completely under control. She handled the jet as if she had been flying it for years, performing better than many newly certified pilots. Years of simulator work and a near photographic memory of technical manuals had prepared her not just to fly, but to anticipate every response of the high-performance aircraft. The real test, though, came when the evaluation moved beyond routine flying into advanced maneuvers. Sarah was pushed to her limits, both technically and physically. She executed tactical turns, emergency response sequences, and combat simulations with an almost effortless precision. Every maneuver spoke to a mind that not only understood the aircraft, but trusted it completely. Captain Chun's performance is exceptional, Chief Flight Instructor Captain James Wilson reported afterward. Her technical expertise gives her an edge that most pilots don't achieve until they've logged hundreds of operational hours. By the end of the evaluation, Sarah had earned full certification for F-16 operations. After 18 long months of being sidelined and denied the assignment she deserved, she was now officially eligible for every squadron mission. But beyond the paperwork, she had proven something much bigger. That true skill, preparation, and competence could overcome even the thickest walls of bureaucracy and prejudice. 6 months later, Sarah was no longer just a pilot. She was leading training exercises, mentoring younger aviators, and becoming the go-to source for technical guidance in flight operations. Her unique combination of engineering knowledge and flying skill turned her into one of the squadron's most valuable assets. The irony wasn't lost on anyone. The very officer who had tried to keep her out, Colonel Thompson, now had his so-called more qualified pilots learning from the woman he had underestimated. Sarah's rise exposed something deeply flawed in the old methods of evaluating personnel. The military's traditional approach had dismissed a source of talent simply because it didn't fit the usual pattern. Foster, now fully cleared to fly again, often requested to serve as her wingman. Having Chun as flight leader gives me confidence, he admitted. When she makes a tactical call, I know it's backed by real technical insight. She understands these jets better than anyone. Their professional partnership quickly became a model for how technical mastery and operational experience could amplify each other. Together, they set new benchmarks for precision, safety, and team coordination that other crews worked hard to replicate. Meanwhile, Thompson was quietly reassigned in what was officially labeled a routine personnel rotation. No one was fooled. Everyone understood that his failure to recognize Sarah's abilities had weakened the squadron and shown a level of judgment that higher command could no longer ignore. His replacement, Colonel Patricia Davis, arrived with a reputation for valuing competence over tradition and skill over outdated expectations. Her very first conversation with Sarah made it clear things had changed for good. "Captain Chun," Davis said after reviewing her file, I've seen what you've done for this squadron. I want to talk about how we can expand these technical programs you've pioneered and replicate your success across the unit. That conversation marked the final step in Sarah's transformation, from the squadron's isolated outsider to an essential, respected leader whose knowledge was now shaping the future of their operations. Later that evening, walking across the flight line under the fading orange glow of the Florida sunset, Sarah reflected on the long, brutal journey that had brought her here. She remembered the smirks, the whispered jokes, the quiet mockery that once followed her every step. All of that had been replaced by nods of acknowledgement and genuine respect. She had never wanted lowered standards or special treatment. All she had asked for was the chance to prove herself, to show that performance mattered more than prejudice. The 18 months of exclusion and quiet discrimination had hardened her resolve and sharpened her skills, preparing her for this new role as both a leader and an instructor. And her personal victory mirrored the larger shift taking place in modern military aviation, an acknowledgement that technical expertise wasn't optional anymore. It was essential. As Sarah's F-16 roared down the runway and lifted into the sky, she felt an unshakable sense of belonging. This wasn't just her place in the cockpit, it was her place in the evolution of military culture itself. The jet responded to her commands with flawless precision and raw power, carrying her into a future where merit would always outshine bias, and respect would be earned in the air, not handed down by tradition. The roar of her engine echoed across McDill Air Force Base, a living reminder to anyone listening that excellence couldn't be boxed in by convention. And those who once laughed at her ambition now watched in silence as her skill and determination soared high above the limits they had tried to place on her.